Hi, I'm Louisa. I'm a designer in fashion and interior. I've picked out a couple of magazines that I am particularly drawn to and tend to buy each edition of. I'm going to start with this first one, Plant, because it's probably one of my favourite journals. It's like a celebration of agriculture, plants, flowers. It's beautiful, and I think being a designer, you sort of always look for inspiration, and obviously plants and fauna is a really obvious source of inspiration, I suppose particularly aesthetically, and for sort of vanity reasons within design work. But there's also another side, like a real sort of truth and depth to the plant that addresses sort of ecological and very current issues, and that sort of is something that I'm very interested in and I think is really important. But going back to a more aesthetic and beautiful side to the plant is just the photography, and their styling is just incredible and is just incredibly visually I don't know, I get a lot from it, being a designer, not even because I don't even design patterns or print, but anyway, the plant never ceased to fail, particularly in this new one. Just the palette and just it's just, for me, it's just absolutely incredible. And then that's not even touching on what they're even discussing and what it's very subtle and silent in its way of sort of approaching quite relevant and challenging issues, and they're doing it in a very beautiful way. So Plant is definitely something that I would always go to, with its just, I suppose, the connection with the land, which for me within my work, even though you wouldn't associate that with fashion, is incredibly important, not just on aesthetics, but with the sort of need to draw together fashion and land, because they're incredibly fundamental and they run side by side, which I think is not something that you necessarily associate with fashion and landscape, but it's where cloth comes from, the land, so to bring it together is quite obvious. Anyway, I'm gonna move on to another periodical that is very similar in the sort of philosophy that Plant is. It's Rake's Progress. This one in particular has a really beautiful article which attracted me, actually, by the ceramicist Cécile Dalladère, who's a Parisian ceramicist that I followed when I was in Paris for a while. And it's another really beautifully styled, the photography is incredible, really delicate, really, a real romanticised vision of landscape and plants, and which is really inspiring, and it's like a breath of fresh air, but it also celebrates the craft as in similar to the plant, it's celebrating craft and within a sort of in a slow way, the traditional craftsmanships, which there's a huge sort of, or what feels like within the industry, a huge sort of revival in the value and appreciation of craft. You know, going back to tradition and roots and back to the land, and it's like celebrating, you know, what comes from the land, and again, that's, for me, that's really inspiring and really, really important. So ceramics is a really beautiful sort of uprising in the sort of where something comes from, and anyway, so Rates Progress had this really lovely article on this particular, which I've lost a thing of, whoops, a particular ceramicist who is really sort of really beautiful work and incredibly popular. Yeah, okay, so that's the Rates Progress, and then there's another one as well that has caught my eye recently, and it's actually like a food magazine called Leon, and again, there's a really sort of, it's quite a large uprising in the value in the food world within the slow food movement, which goes together with the slow craft movement, and the real sort of value and appreciation of where the food comes from, and you know, having taken more care and time to know where your food comes from, and to value the land, and yeah, just to slow the whole process down, which I suppose is why it's called the slow food movement, which is something that, again, I'm in fashion, but they all go hand in hand. Like they all come from the land, and everything, they all need to be slowed down for so many reasons, environmentally and culturally. Anyway, oh my god, I could go on and on. Right, so Leon, and they have a beautiful article in this one called First Growth, and again, Leon's photography and styling is just spot on. It's just really interesting. And this particular article is about a couple who set up a winery in Copenhagen, and yeah, and it's all just going back to the land, and for me, it's just really inspiring, and yeah, just really interesting. So that I would recommend as well. And then to put it all together, I think many of them, it's a bit epically sized, but it's absolutely, yeah, it's top of its game. Just the styling is just incredible. And in this particular edition, it touches on a clothing line called Cosmic Wonder, which is set in Japan, and I think New York as well now, and their ethos is a very sort of environmental, sustainable, but high end and really simple, really, yeah, just spot on, but I think with their philosophy, which is so connected to the environment, it's yeah, it's beautiful. Anyway, again, it's just so beautifully put together, so considered, which in all these magazines I think considered is probably one of the main things, like particularly plant, everything is just very, very considered. Like there's no sort of bling, there's no adverts, it's all really true and honest craftsmanship, and yeah. So but this particularly, yeah, it's just really stripped back and just, it's all about the connection between the land, the environment, the universe, and then putting that together beside fashion. So I think that's one thing that's missing, is there's a lot of magazines now that celebrate slow food and slow craft movement, but there's nothing really, there's not a magazine that I could pull out that was fashion and that connection with the land and the slow fashion movement. I think it's something that sits quite silently and is not really discussed, but I think many of them does in a couple of ways, and particularly within this article on Cosmic Wonder. And there's just one particular little thing, blurb it says, that I think sort of sums it all up for me anyway.
It's like an experience, not just a drink.
It just says that that Cosmic Wonder really celebrate the continuity of the past and the future, and I think within fashion that's incredibly important. I think, you know, use the traditions, grab hold of them from the past, and then use what we've got now, and pull them together, and you're kind of like, it's just a win-win. But that's what Cosmic Wonder do, is grab hold of the past and bring it into the future to preserve and I suppose all the elements that we're at risk of losing. And that's a really very romanticised and very beautiful thing to say, but it's really true, and I think it needs to be within the fashion industry, it needs to be addressed. And there's a whole thing on like paper fabric, which is in Miyake used a lot, and it's incredibly ethical and sustainable, and a really beautiful sculptural material. Anyway, so that's it. Those are my